Hi folks, welcome to the Jasvi Kapoor YouTube channel. In today's episode, we are going to discuss the history of submarines and their evolution over the years. If you are new to the channel, a sub would be really helpful. Let's start with what exactly is a submarine. A submarine is a watercraft capable of independent operation underwater. It differs from a submersible which has more limited underwater capability. In the picture, you can see US Virginia class submarine underway in Groton, Connecticut, July 2004. Let's have a look at how submarines work. To function underwater, submarines are built a bit differently than surface ships that float on the water's surface. In order to travel underwater, submarines must function in agreement with some key laws of nature, including Archimedes' principle and Boyle's law. Submarines are completely enclosed vessels with cylindrical shapes, narrowed ends, and two hulls, the inner hull and the outer hull, as you can see in the image, folks. This is the image of USS Sturgeon class submarine. The inner hull protects the crew from the immense water pressure of the ocean depths and insulates the sub from freezing temperatures. This hull is called pressure hull. The outer hull shapes the submarine's body. The ballast tanks which control the sub's buoyancy are located between the inner and outer hulls. To stay in control and stable, a submerged submarine must maintain a condition called trim. This means its weight must be perfectly balanced throughout the whole ship. It cannot be too light or too heavy aft or too light or too heavy forward. The submarine's crew must continually work to keep the submarine trim because burning fuel and using supplies affect the sub's distribution. Tanks called trim tanks, one forward in the front half of the boat and one aft in the back half of the boat, help keep trim by allowing water to be added and expelled from them as needed. Once the submarine is underwater, it has two controls used for steering. The rudder controls side-to-side turning or yaw, and diving planes control the sub's rise and descent or pitch. There are two sets of diving planes, the sail planes which are located on the sail and the stern planes which are located at the stern or the back of the boat with the rudder and the propeller. Some submarines, including the new Virginia class, make use of bow planes or diving planes located at the bow or the front of the boat rather than sail planes. As you will notice on the above diagram, it has a tall sail that rises out of the submarine's hull. Inside this fin-shaped sail is the conning tower. Con means to direct the steering of the vessel. The periscope and radio and radar antennas are usually extended through the conning tower. In the past, many of the controls used to operate while on the surface were located here. Let me zoom in so you can see in the image. These are some of the important parts of the submarine. Early history. The idea of traveling underneath the ocean waters inside a contained vessel has been around for centuries. Legend says Alexander the Great ventured below the waters of Aegean Sea inside a glass barrel around 333 BC. He is reported to have seen whales and deep sea life on his underwater journey. The next record of a submarine came more than 1900 years later. In 1578 AD, British naval officer William Bourne described a wooden frame vessel enclosed in waterproof leather which could be rowed underwater. Bourne's creation was never realized. Well, on the screen you can see a submarine timeline. In 1620, the Drebbel came. It was the first successful submarine to be built and tested by Cornelius Drebbel. In 1776, the Turtle came. David Bushnell's Turtle used in American Revolution. In 1864, H.L. Hunley became the first American submarine to be used in Civil War. In 1867, the Ictineo II came. It was the first steam-powered submarine. In 1941, the Nazi U-boats influenced US and USSR submarine design. In 1954, the Nautilus came out. It was the first US nuclear submarine. We'll discuss them one by one, starting with the Drebbel. It came out in 1620. Cornelius Jacobson Drebbel was a Dutch engineer and inventor. He was the builder of the first navigable submarine in 1620 and an innovator who contributed to the development of measurement and control systems, optics, and chemistry. This is the Drebbel, folks. Next up, the Turtle came out in 1775. It was the world's first submersible vessel with a documented record of use in combat. It was built in 1775 by American David Bushnell as a means of attaching explosive charges to ships in a harbor for use against the Royal Navy vessels occupying North American harbors during the American Revolutionary War. It was a one-man submarine. The pier-shaped vessel, made of oak reinforced with iron bands, measured about 2.3 meters, 7.5 feet long by 1.8 meters, 6 feet wide. It was equipped with a mine that was to be attached to the hull of the enemy ship. In 1776, in New York Harbor, the Turtle tried to sink the British warship HMS Eagle but failed. None of its succeeding missions were successful. Next up is the 1864 H.L. Hunley. The primitive attack sub H.L. Hunley was designed to help the Confederacy escape the stranglehold of Union naval blockades during the Civil War. Built privately in Mobile, Alabama in 1863, it was fashioned from a recycled iron steam boiler and included space for 8 crewmen, 1 to steer and 7 to turn the hand cranks that powered its propeller. Its bow bristled with 17-foot spar mounted with a torpedo which would detonate when rammed against an enemy ship. Early tests earned the Hunley the nickname Peripatetic Coffin, and for good reason. It sank on 2 occasions during its trial runs, killing a total of 13 crewmen, including its namesake, marine engineer Horace Lawson Hunley. The sub was repeatedly salvaged. However, on Feb 17, 1864, Lieutenant George Dixon and a crew of volunteers sailed it into the Charleston harbor and successfully drove its torpedo into the side of a sloop of war USS Housatonic. The Union vessel went down in minutes, but the Hunley also sank, possibly because of damage sustained during its attack. Despite becoming the first submariners in history to destroy the enemy ship, Dixon and the Confederates all perished. Well, let's talk about the Ictineo II. Ictineo II was a pioneering submarine launched in 1864 by Catalan engineer Narcís Monturiol and was the first air-dependent and combustion-powered submarine and the first submarine to overcome the basic problems of machine-powered underwater navigation. The Ictineo II was originally intended as an improved version of the hand-powered Ictineo I. The Spanish Navy pledged support to Monturiol but did not actually supply it. So he had to raise funds himself, writing a letter to the nation to encourage a popular subscription which raised 300,000 pesetas from citizens of Spain and Cuba and was used to form the company La Navigación Submarina to develop the Ictineo II. The Ictineo II made her maiden voyage under human power on 20th May 1865, submerging to 30 meters. Dissatisfied with the limitations placed on him by human propulsion, Monturiol realized that the only option was steam power. But contemporary steam engines required a fire, which was not an option for a submarine. To his end, he invented an air-independent engine, which ran on chemical reaction and provided its own oxygen for combustion. Monturiol envisaged a new vessel custom-built to house his new engine, which would be entirely built out of metal, with the engine housed in its own separate compartment. However, due to the state of the finances, construction of the new vessel was out of the question, and instead he managed to assemble enough funds to fit the engine into the Ictineo II. On 22nd October 1867, the Ictineo II made its first surface journey under steam power, averaging 3.5 knots or 4 miles per hour, with a top speed of 4.5 knots or 5.2 miles per hour. 2 months later, on 14th December, Monturiol submerged the vessel and ran his chemical engine. but without attempting to travel anywhere. 1941 U-boats. The U-boat threat of World War I. Submarines, although coming into existence years later, saw their combat capability truly tested at the onset of the First World War. In the years preceding the war, Germany massively expanded its undersea fleet, largely in an effort to counteract the vast naval fleet of the UK's Royal Navy. Huge at the time, the British fleet effectively cut off all Germany's maritime trade, blockading the North Sea and English Channel. As a result, Germany all but gave up on attempting to confront the Royal Navy, instead adopting submarine warfare as means of striking back. At the onset of the war, submarine development also shook up the status quo of naval combat. Commanders of the time believed that no submarine could sink a capital ship. This belief was swiftly shattered when, just 2 months into the war, the German SMU 21 sank the scout cruiser HMS Pathfinder. The incident also showed how deep into enemy waters submarines could penetrate. The U 21 was said to have ventured deep into UK's waters, reaching Forthbridge, close to UK's naval base in Rosyth. By the end of the war, Germany had built over 370 U-boats, sending the vessels out into the Atlantic to interfere with shipping. Most of them were Type 93 class submarines carrying 16 torpedoes as well as deck guns to guard the ships when they surfaced. Crewed by 39 sailors, the boats could travel around 9,000 miles from port. During the Second World War, submarines were employed to devastating effect in the North Atlantic. The aim of the war in the Atlantic was to destroy more ships than could be built by the US and UK. However, in World War II, the U-boat fleet in the Atlantic suffered heavy losses while also spurring advancements in shipbuilding to counteract the threat. In other theaters, the Japanese Navy pioneered the use of small-scale submarines, which were intended to defend the home islands from invasion, while the Royal Navy used the boats to blockade Axis-occupied Europe. World War II also saw first and only sinking of a submerged submarine by another submarine using manual calculations that formed the basis of modern targeting computers. In 1945, the UK's HMS Venturer spotted the German Navy sub U-864. After learning it was being followed, the U-864 conducted evasive maneuvers in order to escape the British sub. Venturer's crew calculated the path of the adversarial submarine and launched torpedoes in a fan pattern, meaning that when the German U-boat turned, its crew unwittingly stirred into the line of fire. Since then, no other submarine has done the same. USS Nautilus was the first nuclear-powered submarine. Electric Boat Company in Groton, Connecticut, the same company that had sold the US Navy its first submarine in 1900, laid her keel 14 June 1952. She was launched 18 months later and commissioned in September 1954. Although Nautilus was a large boat for her time, 323 feet or 98 meters long and displacing 4,092 tons submerged, with a crew of 104, she was also fast. The newly developed S-2W submarine Model 2 Westinghouse pressurized water nuclear reactor provided her power both on the surface, where her top speed was 22 knots or 41 km per hour, and underwater, where she could do 23 knots or 42 km per hour. Underway on nuclear power, BT. This was the message from Nautilus to the Commander Submarine Forces Atlantic at start of Nautilus's first sea trial, 17th Jan 1955, shortly after 11 am. Nautilus was a fully functional warship. Here, crewmen load a torpedo through the hatch onto her deck. The Nautilus underwent sea trials in 1955. The first half of the 20th century was packed full of interesting military ideas, with so many new weapons systems popping up over the 5-decade period that was defined by conflict. Every good piece of engineering was contrasted with several very poor ideas. World War II was defined by stuff like the screw tank and the bizarre Focke-Wulf Trepfugel, but the ideas of World War I were a special kind of crazy, the steam-powered submarine. If you wanted a fast naval vessel during World War I, oil-fired steam turbines were the cutting edge capable of accelerating the British Royal Navy's nearly 19,000-ton HMS Dreadnought to speeds of 21 knots. So naturally, the Royal Navy thought fitting that tech into a sub would be a recipe for high-speed scout. The problems with Royal Navy's K-class subs were legion though. While they were quick, capable of hitting 24 knots while surfaced, the unique requirements of steam turbines meant that these boats were also huge. They were nearly as long as today's Los Angeles class nuclear attack subs, but they were nowhere as agile. The bigger problem though was that lowering their large smokestackers and rig the ship for diving took a full 4 minutes. The ship was essentially a sitting duck during this time. If that weren't a big issue, the subs were also known to dive too quickly, and there were a number of incidents, some comical. Imagine, if you will, a sub's stern and propellers sticking clear out of English Channel and others tragic. The Royal Navy thought that K-class was a sound idea, despite First Sea Lord Admiral John Fisher calling the fitment of the steam turbines to a sub the most fatal error imaginable. A major limitation of early submarines was their lack of suitable means of propulsion. In 1880, an English clergyman, George W. Garrett, successfully operated a submarine with steam from a coal-fired boiler that featured a retractable smokestack. The fire had to be extinguished before the craft would submerge, or it would exhaust the air in the submarine. But enough steam remained in the boilers for traveling several miles underwater. Similarly, the Swedish gun designer Torsten Nordenfeldt constructed a steam-powered submarine driven by twin propellers. His craft could be submerged by vertical propellers to a depth of 50 feet and was fitted with one of the first practical torpedo tubes. Several nations built submarines to Nordenfeldt's design. In 1954, with the commissioning of the USS Nautilus, nuclear power became available. Since the nuclear reactor needed no oxygen at all, a single power plant could now suffice for both surface and submerged operation. Moreover, since a very small quantity of nuclear fuel enriched uranium provided power over a very long period, a nuclear submarine could operate completely submerged at a high speed indefinitely. This change was revolutionary. In the typical pre-nuclear submarine attack, the submarine approached the target on the surface to avoid draining the battery and submerged only just before coming within the sight of the target. The submerged approach had to be made at a very low speed, perhaps no more than 2 or 3 knots, again to avoid wasting battery power. The submarine commander had to husband his battery charge until under the attack, when he would have to use full underwater power at the speed of perhaps 7 to 10 knots to evade the counterattack. Even then, a full battery charge would last only about 1 or 2 hours at top speed. This necessity for conserving battery power, which forced diesel electric submarines to approach their targets as quietly and slowly as possible, meant that they could not engage most fast surface warships such as aircraft carriers and battleships. Nuclear submarines were in altogether a different class. Not only could they evade freely, that is, at top speed for indefinite periods when after attacking, they could also operate freely before attacking and keep up with the fast surface ships. This principle was illustrated by the only instance of a nuclear submarine's firing off a weapon in anger. During the Falkland Island conflict in 1982, a British nuclear submarine, HMS Conqueror, followed the fast Argentine cruiser General Belgrano for more than 48 hours before closing in to sink it. That performance would have been entirely beyond the capability of any pre-nuclear submarine. For the first time, a submarine commander could maneuver freely underwater without worrying that he was exhausting his vessel's batteries, and fast surface warships were vulnerable to submarine attack. Initially, the major powers continued to build diesel electric submarines alongside nuclear vessels, but some later gave in to the expense of maintaining two categories of submarine in parallel. After 1959, the US Navy effectively ceased construction of non nuclear submarines. The Royal Navy, which completed its first nuclear submarine HMS Dreadnought in 1963, followed a similar policy except for a brief period in the 80s and early 90s when it built the Upholder class of diesel-electric submarines. Following the end of Cold War, the Royal Navy stopped the Upholder program at 4 boats, eventually decommissioning them and selling them to Canada, and returned to an all-nuclear submarine force. France completed its first nuclear submarine, La Redoutable, in 1971 and effectively abandoned diesel-electric construction for its own navy in 1976, although it still builds on conventional submarines for export. Although the Soviets continued to build diesel submarines, the bulk of their construction shifted to nuclear power after their first nuclear submarine of the November class entered service in 1958. Since the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia has continued the policy of maintaining a mixed nuclear conventional submarine force. In 1968, the Chinese began to build nuclear submarines while continuing to build and purchase large number of non-nuclear submarines. India has followed roughly the same model, buying and building diesel-electric submarines, but also in 1998 beginning construction on its first nuclear vessel. Well, enough talk about submarines. What about anti-submarine warfare? In the distant past, there was no way to detect an underwater craft, and once a submarine dove beneath the surface, it vanished like a ghost. John Holland, who designed the US Navy's first commissioned submarine, wrote in 1900 that the submarine is indeed a sea devil, against which no means we possess at present can prevail. Early anti-submarine warfare tactics depended to a great extent therefore on the use of static defenses such as underwater mines and chain link nets to prevent the movement of subs into secure areas. Torpedo nets were also hung from ships as an anti-sub defense to block torpedoes from reaching their hulls. Subs began countering torpedo nets by adding net-cutting blades to the front of their torpedoes. Ships would also optimistically try to damage submarines by towing grappling hooks connected to explosive charges in the hopes of snagging a sub or throwing charges overboard in the direction of the suspected vehicle. In 1914, one of the first successful anti-submarine attacks was the ramming of the German sub SMU-15 while it was surfaced with engine troubles. The use of decoy Q-ships also had some success against submarines. The Q-ships were heavily armed anti-sub ships disguised as vulnerable targets designed to lure submarines into making surface attacks. Once a U-boat surfaced and got close enough, the Q-ship would open fire and often surprise and overwhelm them. As submarines proved themselves to be a serious threat in World War I, more advanced anti-submarine warfare tactics were explored. An effective defense tactic was the use of shipping convoys, where if one ship was attacked, all the other in the convoy would respond. The main offensive weapon became the use of depth charges. Early depth charges or dropping mines used a cable attached to the surface float which pulled a detonation trigger when the canister sank to the proper depth. These early US Navy Mark I depth charges weighed 100 pounds, contained 50 pounds of TNT and were deployed by being thrown overboard above estimated sub-locations. Anti-submarine warfare during World War II. After World War I, anti-submarine warfare continued to develop. The Navy kept up its efforts to improve depth charges and developed forward-throwing anti-submarine weapons. As submarines became able to dive to greater depths, larger charges were used which could detonate even deeper. The defensive tactic of shipping convoys and escort ships was expanded and was countered by the use of submarine coordinated attack groups or wolf packs which could overwhelm escort defenses. The use of active sonar, ASDIC, could now detect the acoustic signature of the sub, and the range recorder was developed to provide a target position. The combination of sonar technology to locate subs and depth charges to destroy them became the foundation of anti-submarine warfare. While static indicator loops were still used to warn of submarine activity in fixed areas, sonar and depth charges allowed the Navy to begin hunting for enemy subs. Aircraft also began the role of sub-hunters and were fitted with anti-sub weapons such as FIDO, Mk24 mine, airdropped homing torpedo. These smart torpedoes achieved a combat effectiveness of about 22% compared with about 9% for depth charges. Anti-submarine warfare during Cold War. The use of depth charges basically ended during this period and was replaced by a more sophisticated guided torpedo such as the Mark 48. These acoustic torpedoes find targets by listening for their characteristic noise signatures using active or passive sonars. Later versions included wire-guided torpedoes, which receive steering commands via a metal communication wire. More recently, the metal wire was replaced by optic fiber, which can transmit much more information. There were also many improvements in identifying submarines hidden below the ocean surface. New technologies in acoustic detection meant that subs were no longer invisible sea devils. Global listening systems such as the SOSUS sound surveillance system were developed, which use sea-bottom mounted hydrophone arrays connected by underwater cables to facilities ashore to detect submarine positions by triangulation. Acoustic interceptors such as sonar buoys were also developed, in addition to towed passive devices such as magnetic anomaly detector MAD, which can accurately detect large metallic underwater objects. This photo shows the US Navy SH-60B Seahawk anti-sub helicopter equipped with MAD-BIRD device. Anti-submarine warfare today. As each new generation of submarine becomes quieter and harder to detect, the sensing technology used in anti-submarine warfare has in turn improved. If a submarine cannot be seen or heard, then it can't be found, attacked, or destroyed. Sub-hunting torpedoes have followed suit and have now become quieter and harder for submarines to detect and avoid. Today, warfare against submarines is carried out by interconnected network of surface ships, aircraft, and other submarines. Intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance continues to be the foundation of anti-submarine warfare and is accomplished through an array of sensors used to detect and track the acoustic activity of enemy subs. The US Navy's Advanced Deployable System is a good example of modern acoustic undersea surveillance system. Pervasive awareness of the battle space using a network-centric approach to the battlefield is the goal. As the Navy launches its new generation of Virginia-class submarines and plans to build the Columbia class, it's also advancing future anti-submarine warfare projects. Recent developments in naval drone technology may lead to new era of anti-submarine warfare, where sub-hunting robots could take the lead in patrolling the seas. Work is already well underway to deploy unmanned surface ships such as the Sea Hunter Actov, as well as the swarms of AUVs, autonomous underwater vehicles, which could be used to hunt and even destroy subs. A new era of submarines has arrived. Advances in technology will continue to make subs stealthier and detection systems more effective in the ongoing evolution of anti-submarine warfare. If you liked what you saw, give this video a thumbs up. Comment if you'd like me make videos on a particular topic. Share this video with your friends and family. This is your host Tejasvi Kapoor signing off.